Do me a favor. He said, I've got a standalone computer here that's not connected to the internet. Write it up as a memo, and I'm going to courier it over to the FBI. So I sat there and I wrote the whole thing, blow by blow. The next day he calls me and he says, 2 FBI agents are going to come up and talk to you. And I said, okay. So they come up, I recount the whole lunch, and they said, all right, here's what we want you to do. We want you to call him back, invite him to lunch, and then try to get him to tell you exactly what information he wants and how much he's willing to pay for it. And I said, because I'm a patriot, I said, you want me to wear a wire? And they said, no, we're going to be at the next table. We're going to listen to everything. I said, but he only speaks Arabic. That's okay. We got a guy who speaks Arabic, don't we? I said, all right. So I call him. I invite him to lunch. We go to lunch, do the whole thing. But before the lunch, right before the lunch, they called and they said, operation came up. Just write us another memo. Do the lunch and write us another memo. I said, fine. So I write another memo. They asked me to do it a 3rd time, a 4th time, and a 5th time. The 5th time, he says to me, I have great news. He said, I got my dream job. I've been promoted and I'm going to be the deputy ambassador in Cairo. And I said, congratulations. I shook his hand, never saw him again. So I've written all this to the FBI. One day in January of 2012, so I've been out of the Senate for about 9 months, the FBI calls. And I look at my cell phone, it says Federal Bureau of Investigation. I was like, I wonder what that's all about. So I answer, and they said, hey, you remember that thing you helped us out with a year ago? And I said, yeah. And they said, we've got a similar situation and we need your help. And again, because I'm a patriot, I said, anything for the FBI. I kick myself now for saying it. I said, anything for the FBI. What do you want me to do? They said, come down to the Washington field office Thursday morning at 10. I said, done. I go down there the next Thursday, and they're waiting for me at the entrance, which I thought was odd. And we go up to a conference room, and they said, we're both cleared, SI, TK, Gamma, and then there were 2 compartments above top secret that I was cleared for that they said they were cleared for. And so if the conversation necessitated it, we could go into that area. So they said, well, before we start, just wanted to ask you, just read your book. It was great. I loved it. Hey, what about this that you said in your book? And I was like, yeah, okay. Yeah, it was a cool story. What about this other thing? Yeah, I had fun. I said, it was kind of hard. It took me 9 months to write the book, 22 months to get it cleared. Oh yeah, you got it cleared. Yeah, of course I got it cleared. 22 months it took me to get it cleared. I'm thinking, what an odd question. Then they start asking me about something called the Sam Adams Project. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't know what that means. And then the bad cop of the 2 says, we know you've been giving information to the Guantanamo defense attorneys. I said, what are you talking about? And then I said, wait a minute. Are you investigating me? And they said, yeah, and we're raiding your house right now as we speak. And I said, thank God. I said, I want to speak to my attorney right now. That was the only reason that they didn't arrest me. And one of the things that I learned, and this became painfully evident when they started arresting January 6 people, was the FBI in Washington likes to make its arrests on Thursdays because there are no federal arraignments on Friday. So you're in the DC jail Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, getting the shit beaten out of you. And then they arraign you on Monday. And then you want to make a deal just so you don't ever have to go inside that prison. But because I asked to see my attorney, they let me go. So I called the attorney as soon as I got out of the office. Actually, when I was walking out, one of them went over to, I didn't know it at the time, but it was Peter Strzok. And Peter Strzok says, tell me he implicated himself. And the guy said, not really, no. We have to let him go. And so I grabbed my cell phone and I left, went to the attorney's office. They had already called my attorney and said they were charging me with espionage. I hadn't committed espionage. They knew I hadn't committed espionage. And in fact, since then, I'm fast forwarding a lot, 3 FBI agents have reached out to me, well, 2 to my attorneys. 1 reached out to me directly to apologize, saying that this came from the top. They thought it was a BS case. They were sorry they were involved, but there was nothing they could do. One guy reached out to me through eBay, of all things, like to try to cover up the trail. He's like, listen, I've been losing sleep over this for the last 13 years. I just wanted to tell you how sorry I am. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, I hope you feel better. My whole life fell apart. But I'm glad you got that off your chest. So it became a matter of just survival after that. You know, you have to take it seriously. I was facing 45 years in prison. And then when the Justice Department made a request for a proffer meeting, the proffer meeting is they'll give you a little idea of what they have against you, and then they make an offer. You can take it or leave it. And they offered me 45 years. And I said, I'm not doing 45 minutes. I didn't do anything wrong. And this woman, she became Deputy Attorney General for the criminal division under Biden. She said, take this deal, Mr. Kiriakou, and you may live to meet your grandchildren. Oh, I went home that night, and I'm ashamed to even say it. That night, we put the kids to bed. And my wife and I were watching TV, and she said, come on, let's go to bed. I said, I can't sleep. There's no way I'm going to be able to sleep. And she said, no, come on, let's go to bed. She knew I was going to go down into the garage, turn the car on, and just lay across the back seat. And she said, no, come on. You need to try to get some sleep. And she saved me that night. But 45 years? And so they waited 10 months before they were even willing to engage in a conversation. And then they offered 10 years on a Monday. On Wednesday, they offered 8. And on Friday, they offered 5. My lead attorney was this legendary guy named Plato Kacharis. And Plato said, you know, I've been a criminal defense attorney in this city for 52 years. And this is the first time I've ever seen them come down in time. He said, usually they offer you 10, you say no, the next offer's 15, then the next offer's 20. I said, why are they coming down in time? He said, because they have a shit case and they know it's shit. And that's why we're going to go to trial and we're going to win this thing. I said, great. Well, they stayed at 5. And then they came back and they said, 3.5. And I said, I'm going to trial. I'm going to win this thing. Turned out, at the time, my best friend, his wife, had an uncle who was O.J. Simpson's jury consultant. And she called him for me. She said, hey, my friend John, he's in this situation. He's like, yeah, I read about this in the papers. He could use your help. He came up, didn't charge me a cent. He came up to Washington. We got him a security clearance, and which was another thing. We asked for a security clearance, and then the Justice Department called and said, the White House said Kiriakou's attorneys have enough security clearance. And I said, who at the White House said we had enough security clearance? Well, they had to tell us. It was John Brennan. No more attorneys for Kiriakou. Fisher cut bait. We're like, it's not up to John Brennan to decide if I have enough attorneys. Yeah, they have an unlimited number of attorneys, an unlimited budget. As it turned out, they spent $6 million to put me in prison. Was society really better off spending $6 million to put me in a low-security prison for 23 months? So, in the end, they said, best and final offer, 30 months, you do 23. Well, I was only the second American who had ever been charged with this crime of violating the Intelligence Identities Protection Act of 1982. The only other person that was charged with it was a woman named Sharon Scranage. She was a CIA secretary in Ghana in the 80s. And she was having an affair with a member of Ghana's intelligence service. And in the course of pillow talk, she revealed the names of all of the CIA officers in the station and the names of the sources they were running. And so the Ghanaians executed these guys. She got 9 months in prison. 9 months. And they offered me 45 years for blowing the whistle on the torture program. So my wife and I stayed up all night, literally all night. And because Sharon Scranage had taken a plea, there was literally no case law. So what we found several things. We found several articles from the Harvard Law Review saying this law is unconstitutional. It violates the First Amendment, and it is prior restraint, right? Like it tells you in advance you can't say X, Y, and Z. But because there was no case law, you couldn't challenge it in court. And I said, well, can't we just appeal the charge? And maybe, all the way up to the Supreme Court? And they said, yeah, we can do that post-conviction. And then you're going to be 45 years waiting and hoping that the Supreme Court does the right thing. We can't do that. So I decided by 6 a.m. I believed in my heart I hadn't done anything right. This was political. It was a vendetta by John Brennan. And Obama, by all accounts, I had friends, of course, who were still working at the agency and working at the CIA or at the White House, and they said that Obama had this Nixonian obsession with national security leaks. And it's because that came from Brennan. Obama was a senator for 2 years. He didn't have any experience doing anything. So he did what John Brennan told him to do. And Brennan said, you gotta crack down on these leaks. They do nothing but embarrass us. So I decided I'm gonna turn it down. 6 a.m., I send an email to my attorneys. I had 11 attorneys. I was paying half of them, 5 of them. And then one of them writes back and says, put on a pot of coffee, we'll be at the house by 7. So they come to my house. The 4 main ones came to the house. Plato was the first one in. Now imagine this 80-year-old, 6'2", 280-pound, mean old man. He comes in, and I said, good morning, Plato. And he said, you stupid son of a bitch, take the deal. Like that. I said, take the deal? You're the one that told me not to take the deal. You're the one who told me we're going to go to trial and win this thing. And he says, I only told you that to keep your spirits up. And then the second one, his partner, Bob Trout, a sweet gentleman, a southern gentleman. He says, if you were my own brother, I would beg you to take this deal. Now what do I do? And then the third, who is the guy, Mark McDougall, one of the best attorneys I've ever encountered in my life. And the one that I liked and respected the most out of all of them. I liked all of them and respected all of them, but I felt a connection to this guy. He pulls me aside. He was a little bit angry, and he said, you know what your problem is? Your problem is you think this is about justice, and it's not about justice. It's about mitigating the deal. And I looked at my wife. What are we going to do? So I took the deal. And I got 2.5 years in prison, and they made me do every single day of it. In fact, we went to sentencing, and this was in the Eastern District of Virginia, the espionage court. And the reason why we didn't go to trial in the end was that the O.J. Simpson jury consultant said, if we were in any other district in America, I would say, let's go for it. We're going to win this thing. But the Eastern District of Virginia, your entire jury is going to be people from the CIA, from the FBI, from DOD, from intelligence community contractors. He said, buddy, you don't have a prayer. Take the deal. Yeah. It was bad. So at sentencing, my attorney said, Your Honor, we request that Mr. Kiriakou be sent to a minimum security work camp. She says, any objection from the Justice Department? They said, no objection. She goes, okay, minimum security work camp. No bars on the windows, no locks on the doors. You're free to come and go as you please. You're just on your honor not to abscond. And most of the guys work, there's a little college in town. You go sweep the floors or whatever. So I got to the prison 3 months later, and it's weird, the system that we have, Joe. You walk up and you knock on the door and you say, hi, I'm John Kiriakou. I'm here to turn myself in. That's all you do. And your friends and family just drive away. And so they said, yeah, you got to go across the street to the actual prison. They'll process you, and then they just bring you back over here. And I said, okay. So I go across the street. And I said, I'm John Kiriakou. I'm here to turn myself in. And the guy takes me by the arm. We go outside, and we start walking around to the back of the prison. And I said, no. I'm supposed to be at the minimum security camp across the street. And the guy laughs at me, and he goes, not according to my paperwork, you're not. And I was like, oh my God, take it easy. We later learned Brennan was so angry at the shortness of my sentence that he told them, make it as difficult as possible. So I told myself, take it easy. If you make any ruckus, they're going to put you in solitary. Don't say a word. So I didn't say a word. It took them about 40 minutes to process me. Then they walked me to my cell. The only thing the cop said to me, he says, a word of advice, buddy. If anybody comes into your cell uninvited, that's an act of aggression. And I said, great, thanks. I'm here 40 minutes, and now I'm going to get my ass kicked. I appreciate it. And then I started that whole house.
And so, what kind of prison were you in?
I was in FCI, the Federal Correctional Institution at Loretto, Pennsylvania, which is a low security prison, but it's called a low medium, and then there's a high medium. So this was low medium. It took me 5 days to get access to a phone. And I called Mark McDougall, the attorney that I liked so much. And I said, Mark, they put me in the actual prison with the pedophiles and the mafia dons and the drug kingpins. I said, what do I do? He says, oh my God. Well, he said, we could file a motion, but it'll be 2 years before we get a hearing, and you'll be home by then. He said, buddy, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to tough it out. And so that's what I did.
So you have this long career. They put you away. And what is it like for you to feel so betrayed and to get out? And what do you do when you get out?
I was frankly very angry when I got out. I didn't realize how angry I was. Like, people would mention it to me. Like, maybe you should talk to somebody, maybe you should, think about a pharmaceutical option. And I was like, why? There's nothing wrong with me. I'm ready to fight and march and, raise my fist against the Obama administration. And so, I was wrong, of course. I was so angry that it wasn't even healthy for the people around me. But I'll tell you, Joe, the hardest thing is you think you can just step back into your life again, and you'll never be able to step back into your life. So I thought, okay, well, I'm highly educated. I have a bachelor's degree in Middle Eastern Studies. I have a master's degree in legislative policy analysis. I finished my PhD classwork in international affairs. I got rejected by McDonald's, by Safeway, by Target, by Uber. We don't hire felons. I mean, I couldn't get a job anywhere. And you broke. And I was broke. Bankrupt.
You couldn't even get a job driving for
Uber? Uber turned me down. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. But you know what, though?
What did you do?
Well, I was confident that I was right and they were wrong. And my wife, unfortunately, she's now my ex-wife, but she gave me some of the best advice anybody ever gave me. She said, you have to keep telling your side of the story, because eventually they're going to move on to their next one. And if you keep talking, your side of the story is going to be the side of record. And eventually the truth is going to come out. And sure enough, 6 weeks before I was released from prison, I called her. I was allowed to call her every other day for 15 minutes. So I called her and I said, how was your day? And she said, it was great. And I said, really? Great? Why was it so great? And she said, because the Senate torture report was released today, and it proved that everything you said was true. And I said, that is great. And she said, John McCain stood up on the floor of the Senate and said if it weren't for John Kiriakou, the American people would never have had any idea what the CIA was doing in their name. And so when I got home, God bless him, one of the first calls I received was from John McCain's chief of staff. And he said, Senator McCain says, welcome home, and he wants to know what he can do to be helpful. And I said, oh my God. I said, tell him I said thank you. I liked McCain very much from when I was working on Kerry's staff. Kerry was a little jealous of McCain. And McCain would go out of his way to shake my hand and say hi. Kerry said to me one time, why don't you two get a room or something? And I said, no. I said, we have this connection over torture. I said, McCain takes me seriously and I take him seriously. And so when I spoke to McCain, I said, these damn Obama people, they confiscated my pension. And I'm gonna have to work until the day I die. They drove me into bankruptcy and took my pension. So we came up with this idea. It was a great idea to write an amendment. My attorney wrote this amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2016. And it said that every American convicted of violating the Intelligence Identities Protection Act between October 1st and October 31st, 2012, shall hereby have his pension. I'm the only person in the world that refers to. So he said, nobody reads these 1,500-page bills. I'm going to slip it in there. He said, I'm going to be on the conference committee. We'll get it taken care of. And then he got sick, got a brain tumor. And he wasn't named to the conference committee. And so they pulled it back out again. And then he died. And so here I am, 10 years later. The only way that this can be made right is with the presidential pardon. And that's what I've been working on for years.
So what did you do for money?
I was offered a job at a small think tank in Washington called the Institute for Policy Studies. And they said, we'll give you an office, but you're going to have to raise your own salary. And so it was just like constant GoFundMes. I did that for a year. I made $20,000 for the year. And I said, I can't do this. It's untenable. And so I just decided, look, no company is going to hire me, right? I can't go back into government again. And so I'm going to have to work for myself. So I had already written my first book, made number 5 on the New York Times bestsellers list. My second book, I wrote longhand from prison. I ended up winning 2 literary awards for that book. I won the Penn First Amendment Award, which along with the Penn Faulkner, the Pulitzer, and the Edgar Allan Poe is one of the big 4. And then I won the Forward Review's Memoir of the Year that year. I thought, I'm going to keep writing books. I started writing a column that ended up being syndicated through the Consortium for Independent Journalism. So it's like 200 small town papers around the country. And, a little bit here, a little bit there, consulting. And then the Greek government. I happen to be Greek American. My grandparents all came from the island of Rhodes. As soon as I was arrested, like within a day, the Greek ambassador called me. And he said, what can we do to be helpful? And I said, you can give me citizenship. And man, like that, I got Greek citizenship. And so as soon as I got out of prison, the Greek government hired me to help them write a new whistleblower protection law. And then they passed it quickly. The parliament passed it into law, and then the European Union adopted it. So I went to Brussels and I testified there, and then they repackaged it. Now it's the law of the land in all of the European Union. And then people in the States began taking me more seriously. I started doing some paid speaking gigs. I got hired as an adjunct professor at a couple of different universities. And then, after a while, you can make an okay living. I'm still going to have to work until the day I die because I have literally nothing saved. It all went to the attorneys. And, hope for the best. I will say that I was a third-generation Democrat. I left the Democratic Party ages ago. John Brennan and Barack Obama's actions convinced me that I had done the right thing. And now I have found common cause with populist Republicans. You know, you don't have to agree on every issue, right? You don't have to like everybody and everything that they believe in and everything they stand for. But I've struck up a great friendship, for example, with Tucker Carlson. Sweetest guy in the world. And a great supporter of mine. And Judge Napolitano. It's a love fest every time that the two of us get together. And I realized that, you know, this political system we have, it's antiquated. It doesn't work. You have to engage with the individual. Like, I never thought that I would be agreeing with Marjorie Taylor Greene on some of these civil liberties issues, right? Or Thomas Massey, or Bernie Sanders for that matter. But I've realized that, I've got to stand up for what's right, not what the DNC happens to think what's right, or some politician that I used to, think I had respect for thinks is right. A couple of nights before I left for prison, the former director of the CIA's Counterterrorism Center, who later became the deputy director for operations and was very close to Brennan. He was the DDO when Brennan was the director of the CIA. He tweeted at me and he said, "Don't drop the soap," with a laughing emoji. I gave myself a couple hours to cool off. And then I texted back and I said, "Jose, I'm on the right side of history and you are not." And that gave me such peace. I knew I could go to prison, survive this just fine, and come out and still make an impact. And, knock on wood, that's how it's worked out. Whew. It's ugly. And you get to prison. One of my attorneys said, "Hey, I've collected a list of 600 email addresses from people who want to know how you're doing. Once you get there, once you get comfortable, just send me a letter and I'll send it around to these people." I said, "Okay, great." It took me, you don't realize it, but you're in shock for the first week or two. And then I started settling into the routine. And it was it was pretty screwed up. That first day, 20 minutes after the cop warned me about people coming into my room unannounced, these two guys just walk in boldly, I jump up, I put my fists up, I go, "What do you want?" One of them has a swastika on his neck. It took up his entire neck. It came up onto his face. The other one had "fuck you" tattooed on his eyelids. So I go, "What do you want?" And the swastika guy says, "You the new guy?" I said, "Yeah, so?" And he says, "You a fag?" I said, "No, I'm not a fag." He said, "You a rat?" I said, "No, I didn't have anybody else in my case. I'm not a rat." And he says, "You a chomo?" I go, "I don't know what that word means." He goes, "Chomo, child molester." I said, "No, I'm not a child molester." And he goes, "Okay, you could sit with the Aryans in the cafeteria." And I was like, "Oh, I guess I'm with the Aryans now." Grand. Yeah. And then the guy across the hall from me was the boss of the Bonanno family. And one day he said to me, I would get the New York Times and he would get the New York Post, and we would trade at the end of each day. He asked me, "Let me ask you something," he says. "Why you sit with those Nazi retards in the cafeteria?" I said, "I don't know, Pete. My first day here, they told me to sit with them." He goes, "From today, you're with the Italians." And I said, "Awesome." And they became my closest friends. I mean, I got a book out of it. They were absolutely wonderful, honorable, honest, fun. The smallest so-called gang in the prison, but the one that commanded the most respect. And once word was out that I was with the Italians, it was hands off. And it was thanks to one guy. Shout out to Mark Lanzalotti. Mark was from Philly, and he saw in the New York Times I was going to be assigned to that prison on a Sunday. I was assigned on Thursday, and he took it upon himself to go to every one of the Italians to say, "There's a CIA guy coming here. He's not an FBI agent. The FBI are cops and rats. The CIA protected us from the Muslims. And they're like, oh, okay. And so it was, welcome. No problems.
God, that has to be insanely stressful.
It was like living in the Twilight Zone. The stress will kill you. It's incredible. You see people break down all the time. They just lose it. And it's not like you're gonna, be taken out to some medical unit someplace. You go to solitary, and you can live or die down in there. Yeah. Oh, so I was telling you. So I waited about 6 weeks before I was comfortable enough to write a letter. So I very arrogantly called it Letter from Loretto because I had such respect for Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. And so I said 2 things in this. I mean, I talked about the food and I talked about the Italians, but I said 2 things. I said there was this one guard who was really abusive. She was absolutely horrible. You know that phrase, rode hard and put away wet? That was this woman, all tatted out from, the neck down, and just a nasty, mean, old, awful person. So I was walking through the hall one day, and she said, "Hey, are you that motherfucker whose name I can't pronounce at mail call?" And I go, "Kiriakou," just like it's spelled. She goes, "How about if I call you fuckface?" Like that. So I said, "Classy," and I walked away. Somebody later told me, they're not allowed to talk to us that way. That's a violation of, code 11.8 subsection, B, whatever. So I wrote it in the letter, and I was just like, life in prison. What am I going to do? This woman swears at me. There's nothing I can do. The other thing was more important. I had been there 3 days, and one of my cellmates was an Australian arsonist. And he said, "Let me walk you around and introduce you to the guys." I said, "Okay." We go to this other housing unit, and there's a little tiny guy there who didn't speak any English, and he said, "This is," I forget what his name is, Ahmed or something. He's from Iraq. And I said, "Ana sharaf bima'riftek. It's very nice to meet you." And he says, "تتكلم عربي وأنا عرب أنا من Iraq." I said, "Yeah, great, you're from Iraq. I was in Iraq. It's very nice to meet you." Turns out he was there on a terrorism charge. He was the imam of some mosque in New York, and somebody was trying to sell a Stinger missile to somebody, and he translated the document, the bill of sale, and he got wrapped up in this terrorism case. So I get called into the lieutenant's office the next day. And usually if you're being called into the lieutenant's office, you're going straight to solitary. So I hear my name, "Kiriakou, lieutenant's office, immediately." Always with immediately. And they know you can't do it immediately because all the doors are locked. So I wait for a 10-minute move period. The bells ring, and I go to the lieutenant's office. I said, "You wanted to see me?" And they have this guy's picture on a computer screen. "You know this guy?" I said, "I don't know him. I met him yesterday." "What'd you say to him?" I said, "Nice to meet you." "What did he say to you?" He said, "Nice to meet you too." "Oh yeah? Well, after you walked out, he called a number in Pakistan, and they told him to kill you." I said, "Get the fuck out of here. I could kill this guy with my thumb." No, don't do that. We've been looking for a reason to transfer him out." I'm like, okay. So every time I see this guy, I give him the stink eye, right? And then he gives me the stink eye back. But then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, that doesn't make any sense. He's Kurdish. He only speaks Arabic and Kurdish. Why would he call a number in Pakistan when they don't speak Arabic in Pakistan? That just didn't make sense. So I saw him in the yard, and I went up to him, and he got kind of scared, like he was going to try to defend himself. And I had, 6 inches and 100 pounds on this guy. So I said, "Wait a minute. I just want to ask you a question. Did the cops say anything to you about me?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "What did they say to you?" And he said, "They told me that after we met, you called a number in Washington, and they told you to kill me." And I said, "Oh, they did they?" So I went back to the law library, and I looked this up, and this was a Class D felony. It was conspiring to commit violence in a federal facility. It's punishable by up to 5 years in prison. So I wrote it in my letter, and I sent it to my attorney, and I didn't give it a second thought. I didn't know my attorney was friends with Ariana Huffington, who then put it on Huffington Post with this banner headline, millions of hits. The next thing I know, Jake Tapper drives to the prison to interview me, and it's everywhere from CNN to Playboy to The Economist and Time Magazine, when Time Magazine was a thing, and NPR's calling the prison to interview me, and the next thing I know, I'm called to the warden's office. Well, that's in an off-limits part of the facility. So the warden calls me in, he's like, I'm gonna send you to solitary right now. And I thought, is now the time to be humble before the warden, or should I stake my claim? And I said, Warden, with all due respect, I've gone nose to nose with Al-Qaeda, with Hezbollah, with the Iranians, and you want me to be afraid of you? Give me some credit. He said, yeah? We'll see what you say when you've spent some time in solitary. I said, I've lived in Yemen, in Pakistan.
What can I do for
I'm not
you?
afraid of your Loretto, Pennsylvania solitary. Besides, I said, go ahead and send me to solitary.
Safe travels.
CNN's going to be waiting for you next to your car in the parking lot. And I just looked at him. I never went to solitary, not for a minute.
Wow. Jeez. So they're just trying to set you guys up.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to get you guys at each other's throat. And
They-
hopefully
yeah,
one of you will do something.
They did it one other time. One of my
Do
attorneys.
you know who orchestrated that?
No.
Do you
that
think it
we
was
could,
the warden himself?
No, I
No?
don't think he was smart enough. I don't think he cared enough. It had to come from the agency.
Oh, man.
There was one other incident too. I lived in the same block of cells with an Afghan-American pharmacist who had an oxy problem. Nice guy. And he came up to me one day and he said, hey, the spokesman for the Taliban is here now and he wants to meet you. I said, the spokesman for the Taliban? I said, are you talking about that case in New Jersey? And he said, yeah. I said, I don't have anything to say to the spokesman of the Taliban. I don't want to meet him. And he said, oh, okay, I'll tell him.
What brings you?
So I'm out in the yard one day, and my attorney had warned me, they're upset at the shortness of your sentence. So be very careful. They're going to try to set you up and add years on. So I'm out in the yard, and here comes this guy with a beard down to his waist, and he's got his hand out to shake my hand. And I put my hands up so as not to touch him. And I look just past him, and there's a guard in the woods outside the thing with a long distance camera lens, and he's going click, 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 click. And I said, don't you even think about touching me. And he said, oh, come on, man, come on. We have a lot in common. I said, we have nothing in common. I spent half my career trying to kill people like you. I said, get away from me. Don't touch me, or you're going to end up unconscious on the ground. And he walked away, and then he got transferred out. And I said, isn't it interesting that the spokesman for the Taliban was sent to our prison and was only here for 4 days? Isn't that interesting? And then they just gave up.
Wow. This kind of stuff is so hard to believe.
It's America. You don't want to
Yeah.
believe this
You don't
about
wanna believe it.
America.
You want to believe we're the good guys.
Yeah.
And you want to believe that we would never turn on our own like that over something that's just.
Yeah, but they do.
But the crazy thing is, it's like the CIA torture program wasn't even effective.
No, that's the thing. It
That's
wasn't
what's
even
so
effective.
nuts.
But you know what, though, Joe? When these guys die, and they've started to die, in their obituaries, it's going to say that they were among the creators of the CIA's torture program. And so they have a vested interest in repeating this lie over and over and over again, that it was the right thing to do.
But
and
what I
it
don't
worked.
understand is, wouldn't they want to be effective?
You would think.
That, I mean, that's
If they were clear-headed, yes.
that's the only thing that makes the least sense to me. Like, idealistically, I like to think of the people that are in charge of the CIA of having a very important role in national security.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're in a position where you have a very important role in national security, it's imperative to do what is most effective. And if torture is not most effective,
Then don't do it.
then you would abandon torture and use those coercion tactics that the other guy was using.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, they ended up abandoning the torture program. Yeah. Mitchell and Jessen took their $108 million and they retired to Florida. And then subsequent CIA directors following George Tenet said, yeah, you know, this didn't work. We're not going to do it anymore.
God. I mean,
I have to laugh just because it's so nuts. What else can you do?
it's beyond nuts. It's disgusting. And it's just amazing that they could get away with that.
Yeah, and they have. Nobody's been prosecuted. Nobody.
Does Trump know about all this stuff?
About my stuff?
Yeah. Like, have you ever
I don't
tried
know.
to get a pardon out of him?
I've tried. Let me rephrase. I am trying. So I have a letter that that Ronald Reagan's former Deputy Attorney General generously wrote, asking the president to pardon me. Tucker Carlson signed it. Judge Napolitano signed it. Doug Deason, who's a friend of the president, signed it. Sid Miller, who's here in Texas, has signed it. And the president's former U.S. attorney in Utah has signed it. And then, and I sent it to Ed Martin, the U.S. pardon attorney. And then other people have said, oh, I would have signed that. So we have a second letter. Dr. Phil has agreed to sign it. There are a couple of other people, high-level people. Ken Higgian, who was the head of the president's transition team, has signed it. And there are a couple of others. We had really good news yesterday from CIA Director John Ratcliffe. And he said that the CIA has no objection if the president were to pardon me. That's a big deal. We have also a nice one-sentence statement from Tulsi Gabbard saying that she has no objection to a pardon. So, I don't know. I'm hoping for the best. You know what they say in business school? Hope is not a strategy. But I genuinely don't know what else to do.
Now, you're doing all these conversations. You did the conversation with Tucker, you did his show, you're now doing my show, you've done a bunch of other shows. Do you have any concern that in exposing more of what has been done to you, that it somehow limits your possibility of being pardoned because you're exposing so many people that may still be working there?
I'm told that all of my detractors are either dead or retired. A friend of mine from the CIA called me the other day to say something very funny, that she was sitting in a mandatory security briefing, and she said one of the slides was just a picture of me, and it said the insider threat underneath. And she said everybody started to boo, and the instructor said, why are you booing? And one of the guys said, he's not an insider threat, he's a whistleblower. And she said, in the next running of the class, my picture was removed. So I won, and John Brennan lost. That's really what it's come down to.
Ugh. It's so hard to hear these stories.
It's terrible.
It's so hard to imagine that our government could be so disgusting.
Oh my God, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. Truly, I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And you know, think of it this way. Also, at the working level, these FBI agents don't get promoted by not arresting you.
Right.
The assistant U.S. attorneys don't get promoted by not prosecuting you or by giving you a short sentence, right? They all see themselves as, you know, having the corner office at the law firm someday, or running for Congress or for governor, and they're going to make that career on your back.
That's the problem, right? Because there's a lot of cases where people are setting people up, and you know, I was talking to a friend of mine about this one case where there was I'm sure you remember it, there was a 19-year-old, I think he was probably at the very least intellectually challenged guy, and they tricked him into, they radicalized him, gave him a fake bomb, gave him a cell phone. Do you know the story?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And then swept in and got him. And he wasn't planning on doing anything.
No.
It was, they talked him into doing the whole thing. He wasn't a bright person, and they got arrested because of that. So it adds to their career.
That's it.
Like when I was having a conversation about this, we brought up the governor that they were planning to kidnap.
Yeah.
Governor
Whitmer.
Yeah. Michigan. Yeah. And that 12 to 14 people were working with the FBI.
Yeah.
Which is just.
Right. Well, listen, there are well-documented cases where the FBI infiltrates a group and they go to a meeting and literally everybody in the meeting is an FBI agent. Like, what is that? Is this a joke? This is what the American taxpayers' money goes for. Have you heard of the Route 82 bridge plot in Cleveland?
No.
There are 3 morons sitting in a bar, getting drunk.
Oh, I did hear about this.
The other guy comes in, hey, you know what we should do? It'd be so much fun, blow up the Route 82 bridge. I have some explosives. And these guys are drunk. They're like, yeah, let's do Route 82 bridge. Well, the guy with the explosives is an FBI informant. He set them all up. And they got like 20, 18, and 15 years in prison. It was the FBI's idea, not their idea. They're just sitting in a bar drinking.
Well, how about January 6th?
How about January 6th?
This is the
there you
crazy
go.
thing. I was trying to explain to Jim Gaffigan one day. Jim Gaffigan was talking about what they did on January 6th. It was that there were people that were working for the federal government. They were employees of the federal government that were on that lawn trying to convince people to go in. And he was very incredulous. He did not believe it, and I said, there are agent provocateurs
Yes.
that is their job to try to get you to do something illegal.
Exactly. So they can build their careers by making these arrests.
Not just that, but demonize the president, the former
100%.
president, to a much larger extent. To charge him with insurrection, to say that he was plotting to overthrow the government.
Yeah, and as it turns out, the only one who was actually plotting to overthrow the government was John Brennan.
How was he plotting to overthrow the government?
In 2015 and 2016 with Russiagate.
Oh.
You know, I remember talking to CIA friends of mine saying, you know, they taught us in training that you've got to follow the evidence. And there's no evidence that any of this happened. I worked with Christopher Steele on an operation in London 25 years ago, 26 years ago. There was this fundamental misunderstanding of what an operations officer was supposed to do. An operations officer goes out and collects intelligence and then sends it back. And that's it. Then it's up to the analyst to decide, this is great, this is crap, this is not true, this is partially true, whatever. So he goes out there, talks to whatever low-level, terrible sources he happened to have, writes all this nonsense down, sends it back, and they're like, oh, look what Donald Trump did.
Greetings, champion.
He hired prostitutes to pee on
Journey
Barack
with
Obama's
me,
bed.
and
No,
I
he
shall
didn't.
show you the might of High
One
Mountain.
guy made this up, and Christopher Steele wrote it and sent it back. That doesn't make it fact. You
Wasn't
can't-
it funded by the Hillary Clinton?
It sure was.
I was
Yes, it was.
welcome, champion,
Yeah.
to Thunder
Which
Dome.
is equally wild.
You made another point I wanted to
Warriors
address.
from the
These
Blood
January
Totem
6
tribe,
people,
or Eagle Riders from
let's
the
say
Skyhorn
that some
tribe.
of them
Today,
did
we are
do
so few, we could
whatever,
barely keep a
broke the
cold.
window, or went into the building unauthorized. Okay, then that's deserving of a smack on the hand and a strongly worded letter and maybe $1,000 fine. Don't do that again.
Will take you into the
30
secret
years in
hall of
prison?
chieftains, where Mayor
Again,
High Mountain
is
awaits you.
society really better off by locking all these people up and spending millions and millions of dollars of the taxpayers' money to do it?
I am made
Of course not.
No, of course not. But it also just divides us even
It
further.
does.
And it also
And
very much
I-
distorted the narrative
I speak
with
for
people
the
like
tribes.
Jim Gaffigan, who's a friend of mine, who's a very left-leaning comedian. And he had it in his mind that these people went in, and they also have this thing where they say a cop was murdered.
Right.
That's not
I
true.
I hate that.
They say it over and over again. It's not true. One cop
river
died after the fact of a heart attack.
I have just the thing
You
for
could say maybe it was because of the stress of January 6th, perhaps.
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
Maybe he shouldn't have been a cop.
Yeah. I mean, if you can
Yeah, it's such
die of a heart,
significant health problem.
right? Like that's not normal. To just die of a heart attack is a very stressful thing. But that's it. This idea that they killed cops, that narrative keeps coming out. It was an insurrection. They murdered cops. They broke into the White House. They were looking for Nancy Pelosi. They were going to kill her. Like, okay, are you sure? Because there's a lot of this story that's bullshit. Now it turns out, at one point in time, they were saying it was 20 FBI agents. Now the latest number is 270. Yeah, that's a lot of people. It's a lot of people that are encouraging people to break in. And there's many instances of these suspected people that are on camera. A lot of them wearing face masks. There's one of them where a guy's removing the broken glass from the window and encouraging people to go in, and another guy gets in his face and goes, "Do not do that," and then he pushes that guy, "Fuck you," and the other guy backs off. How is that not being investigated as a serious crime? And like that's a serious, it's a violation of what you're supposed to be doing in the first place. If the FBI was on that lawn, I would hope what they would be doing is informing people entering into this building is a felony. Breaking these windows, getting into this building you do not want to do this. If you want to peacefully protest, do that. But I'm telling you, this will fuck with you for the rest of your life, and most likely you.
I think you're 100% right.
That's what I would hope from law enforcement. I wouldn't hope that they would be trying to set people up.
And from a civilized society.
Right.
You know, do we want to set people up to go to prison? We want to wreck families and wreck people's lives? Why would we want to do that?
Also, did they turn down the idea of bringing in the National Guard?
You know, I really don't understand. It appears, yes. It appears that that's exactly what happened.
Also significantly deterred people from committing these crimes.
That's right.
That they were encouraged to do.
I'll tell you, if I was at a demonstration and all of a sudden the National Guard showed up, I'd say, this isn't for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think most people would do that as well.
You're right.
Goodbye. Farewell.
It's crazy. It's just so gross that our legal system gets used against political opponents in that way, in such a devious, just a sinister way.
Harry Truman once famously said, "If you want a friend in Washington, get a dog."
Yeah. God, what a gross business. It's just sad because I also am a patriot, and I want to think of us as better than that.
Yeah, we're the good guys.
And I don't think it's necessarily the fault of these individuals. I think the system really sucks. And I think you work for that system, and just like all these Congress people that wind up insider trading, everybody else is doing it. It's the culture. You get wrapped up in it, just like bad cops. You know, you get assigned to a precinct that's filled with corrupt cops, and you have to do things to stay with them. They're your blood brothers, and you're all in this together. And so you wind up doing some criminal activities that you think are just, everybody does it. This is what we do.
Yep.
And you're an FBI agent. Well, we're going to set this guy up. Okay, let's set him up. This is what we do. Hey, if he doesn't do it, he's not committing a crime. We got nothing on him. Okay? And then you just convince him to do it, and he's a fucking idiot. And so he does it, and he hits that cell phone, and now you're arresting him. And he's like, what?
Yeah.
And he's so dumb, he barely knows what happened.
And the chances are he can't afford a decent attorney, or he's not notorious enough and newsworthy enough to get, A-list attorneys volunteering pro bono. So he's stuck with a public defender that's going to spend 8 hours on the case, and he's going to get screwed in the end.
And there's also the narrative that's very difficult to shake. So if you get accused of some sort of a heinous crime, the narrative for most people that are casual viewers of that story is that you're a terrorist.
Yeah.
Or you're a guy who's going to kidnap the governor. Or you're a guy who's an insurrectionist who's trying to overthrow the government on January 6th. And then you watch the footage that they wouldn't release during the trials, and you see them getting a guided tour. the guided tour through like the security guards are walking them into the Senate. Like, what the fuck? What is this? Like, what is, and why is no one outraged? And why is it only one side that's outraged? God, if I was a Democrat congressman or a senator, or if I was any sort of politician on the other side, I'd be like, do you know how disgusting this is? This is, you're using this to go after Donald Trump?
Of all things.
Instead of just better political opposition?
Exactly. And the media are to blame in part as well.
Well, they're bought and paid for.
Absolutely.
I mean, 100%. The media in this country is a complete total. The only thing that's real media in this country are independent journalists.
That's right.
And there's mostly people who worked for large media corporations and either were fired or had to leave because of their own ethics and morals, and eventually branched out on their own. And now they're
Yeah.
they're worried about being prosecuted or set up,
Couldn't agree more.
killed. Yeah, it's super sketchy because we like to think of ourselves as better. This is the shining example for the rest of the world. This is the experiment in self-government that the whole world follows this lead. And when you see that not just tolerated, but standard.
Yeah, it hurts. It really does. I was raised in a family like you were, where I was taught that this was the greatest country on earth, bar none.
I still think it is.
And I do too.
Which is
and
even
that's why
crazier.
we have to weed out the likes of John Brennan.
God. But it seems like there's
Yeah.
that are deeply rooted. And this is what you were talking about too, that presidents come and go. And those people, that's the real power. You know, this term, the deep state, a lot of people that are, there's a lot of people that don't like to entertain any kind of conspiracies because they think it's like a fool's journey. But you're really foolish if you don't believe in conspiracies. Because just how many of them have to be proven true before you go, maybe I should reassess my position?
It's 62 years after the JFK assassination, and we're still learning new information.
Yeah.
Information that's been kept from us.
And still being kept. There's still a lot of it. I mean, they were
Sure.
supposed to. That was one of the more disappointing things about this administration. Like, immediately, right off the jump, we're supposed to get all the CIA files, all the JFK files. We're supposed to know exactly what happened to him. We know very little. Very little new information has been released that illuminates any aspects of that case.
Yeah. It's a shame.
Yeah, it's terrible. Because most likely, at least some part of our government was involved in assassinating the president. No one went to jail.
No.
Nothing happened. And in fact, people succeeded and thrived.
Sad truth.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened.
I mean, it goes back. There's so many cases. Like, I've had conversations with people that, like, they don't want to be fools. So that's a lot of people don't want to be fools. Most of it can be explained away by incompetence or coincidence and this and that. Like, that's not even true. It's not even most of it. It's some things can be explained
Some
away.
things. I had a friend at the agency. He was one of my first bosses, and he had started out in this internship program that the agency had. You had to be working on a master's degree. But anyway, his first assignment was in the Counterintelligence Center, which at the time was being run by James Angleton. And on his first day, the secretary walked him around and, this is what we do over here and this is what we do over there. And there was this entire wall of file folders. And she said, whatever you do, don't look in those folders. You're not cleared for that. Well, he said, well, of course, the very first minute that he's left alone, he runs and looks in the folders. And he said every single one of those folders was on an American citizen. And the CIA is forbidden by law to spy on America.
Let me hear your bones.
The crazy thing, too, in a lot of people's eyes, is the difference between what they thought of, what the narrative is of the Obama administration in terms of like whistleblowers like what the hope was. It was hope and change, right?
Oh, hope and change. And you know the statistic. The Espionage Act was written in 1917 to combat German saboteurs during the First World War. Between 1917 and 2009, 3 Americans were charged with espionage for speaking to the media. Under Barack Obama, 8 people were charged with espionage for speaking to the media. So he was the enemy of whistleblowers.
Not only that, that was part of his campaign.
Yeah.
Part of his campaign was protection of whistleblowers.
Absolutely.
In fact, it was in the Hope and Change website.
Yeah, well, look at the Dashti Lele massacre that I mentioned earlier. It was part of his campaign to open an investigation of Dashti Lele. What happened was at Dashti Lele, Afghanistan, on November the 30th and December the 1st, 2001, 2,000 Taliban soldiers gave up en masse, right? And the Northern Alliance called us and said, what do we do with all these guys? We don't have room for them. So we told them, put them in trucks, take them out to the desert, and just hold them there until we can divide them up and send them to smaller jails all around the country. And if we have to, we can send some to Pakistan. But there were no air holes in the containers. There was no food. There was no water. And of the 2,000, 14 survived. And one of the 14 said that when they opened the trucks in the desert, the bodies fell out like sardines from a can. So Barack Obama said in 2008, he's elected president, he's going to investigate this massacre, get to the bottom of it. And there was nothing. So I said to John Kerry, I said, listen, this is part of the Obama campaign. Let me go to Afghanistan and investigate this thing. And so I went, and there are still bones just sticking out of the sand. There are clothes that have just been laying there in the desert all these years. All the bodies are still there, what's left of them. Yeah, it's grisly. So I come back, and I get a call from a kind of a prominent human rights activist, and he said he wanted to see me, but it had to be private. So we went to Johns Hopkins University. There was a classroom that wasn't being used. We met there, and he said, listen, I have a witness who was 12 years old at the time, and he was hiding behind a rock, and he saw what happened when they opened the trucks and the bodies fell out. I said, okay. And he said, but what's new is he says that there were 2 men there wearing blue jeans and black t-shirts, and they were speaking English. I said, okay, that's all I need. So I wrote a letter to the agency, and I asked, for clarification, were any CIA personnel on site at the box-up or at the location where the trucks were opened? And I had it auto-penned John Kerry, chairman. 6 weeks later, a colleague comes into my office and he says, hey, you got a response from the agency to your letter. I said, I didn't see any response from the agency. I just checked my mail an hour ago. And he said, they classified it top secret. It's down in the vault. I said, top secret? I said, well, what did it say? And he says, it says, go fuck yourself. I said, great. That's how they want to play it. So I went to Kerry, and Kerry says, we're stirring up a hornet's nest here, and I think we should just let this fade into history. And I was like, again? Because you want so badly to be Secretary of State. Again.
God, what a gross business.
It's awful. Hideous.
What is it like for you on the outside now, watching what's going on in the world?
There are some places that I'm optimistic about. And actually, there are some developments that may look ugly on the surface that I'm optimistic about. First of all, this ceasefire, we're recording this on, I guess today's Thursday, but the ceasefire that was announced this morning, this is huge. Huge. And I think this is not a victory for the Israelis. I think that it makes Donald Trump stronger and Benjamin Netanyahu weaker. Netanyahu's decision to bomb Qatar was too much. Just too much. It could have served to embarrass the president. What it ended up doing is it weakened Netanyahu's position. So that's a victory for the White House, as far as I'm concerned.
Can I stop you real quick?
Yeah.
the correct pronunciation? How did you say it?
Gutter.
You said gutter.
It's qaf. It's back here. It's called a qaf.
But so I've
Qatar.
heard cutter.
Yeah,
it's not cutter, but you're saying it like a G?
They use a G sound.
Gutter.
Other Arabs would call it Qatar with a K.
Uh-huh.
But in the Gulf dialect, it's way down here. Qatar.
Qatar.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
The other thing is Iran. Man, I follow Iran more closely than anybody I know. You remember, you're a little bit younger than I am, but not much. When we were kids, we had a terrible relationship with China. And Richard Nixon was the most anti-China person that could possibly have been elected president. Yet it was Nixon that went to China and made peace with the Chinese and opened diplomatic relations. And call me crazy, but I think that if there's going to be peace with Iran, Donald Trump's going to make that peace with Iran. It may not be in the form of a trip to Tehran, but I could see a trip to Riyadh and have a meeting brokered by Mohammed bin Salman, and maybe we can come to some sort of an agreement on issue number 1 or issue number 2.
Well, it seems to be a part of what he wants to accomplish in these 4 years, is that he wants to go down as having made significant change in the world in a positive direction.
And we're seeing it, whether people want to admit it or not.
That's part of the problem because of narrative.
That's it. You know, peace between India and Pakistan doesn't fit in the Democratic Party's narrative that Donald Trump is a warmonger. He's not a warmonger. Ask, the Africans that he's weighed in for, and we have peace in sub-Saharan Africa now. Or this agreement today between Hamas and the Israelis. I think this is the first of several new developments that's going to lead to the end of this conflict.
What is your take on Netanyahu's position? Because if war is over, Netanyahu will no longer be running Israel. Is that correct?
Eventually. Netanyahu has a vested interest in making sure that this war lasts as long as possible, because remember, he's still under indictment for corruption. Also, one thing that most Americans don't understand is the Israeli political system is such that it is literally impossible for any party to win a working majority in the Knesset. Right? There are just too many parties and too many individual interests. So you've got, a dozen parties represented. Benjamin Netanyahu has never won more than 27% of the vote.
Wow.
He's very unpopular. It's just that he's the least unpopular of the unpopular politicians. And it's a crazy way to run a country. One of the things that the Greeks did, because the Greeks had the same problem, there are just too many parties, right? So you win 20% and you become the prime minister. 20%, nobody wants you. So what they did is they raised the threshold to which you have to meet to win election to the parliament from 3% to 5%. So that narrows it down to like 6 or 7 parties. But then the party that comes in first past the poll, gets an extra 50 seats. Then you don't have to go into any coalition governments with anybody. And you can run the country for 4 years or 5 years, whatever it happens to be. That's what the Israelis need to do. But Netanyahu, longest serving prime minister in Israeli history, wildly unpopular. And it's funny because he used to be considered a right-wing extremist, and now he's the moderate of the The likes of Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and these other guys who have come in from the right, they were attacking him to the point where he had to bring their parties into this coalition government just to get him to shut up. I mean, these are people that have felony convictions for anti-Arab hate crimes, and now they're, Minister of National Security, Minister of Finance with responsibility for the West Bank. What's that?
Wow.
It's a terrible, untenable position.
Haven't they decided to go ahead and prosecute him even while he's in office?
Yeah, there's an ongoing dispute that the Israeli Supreme Court has weighed in on a number of times. So the Minister of Justice is appointed, of course, by the Prime Minister. But the Supreme Court is independent of the Prime Minister and the Minister of Justice. So the Minister of Justice says you can't prosecute him while he's Prime Minister. And the Supreme Court says, oh, yes, you can, and orders the court then to continue the case. So if the case is going to be continued, Netanyahu's only viable strategy is delaying tactics. Appeal after appeal after appeal. You make, you submit motions on little technical issues. Maybe you get them to focus on Mrs. Netanyahu, who's also under indictment, and you just delay it as long as you can. But the best argument that he has is, I can't focus on my own defense because I have a war to prosecute. If there's peace, then he's going to have to go on trial.
Wow. Which incentivizes him to stay at war, which is so crazy.
Isn't it, though? Strange situation.
Well, a lot of people aren't aware that there was hundreds of thousands of people protesting in the streets before October 7th.
Oh, you're exactly right. In fact, in August, we saw the biggest protests in American history, in Israeli history, demanding that Netanyahu resign, and it was all because of corruption.
And what is the specific corruption that he's being accused of?
You know, it's changed over the years. Some of it had to do with business. Other accusations had to do with him trying to essentially sell positions in the government. But, you know, I read the accusations when they first came out. They weren't strong. They're defensible. So I don't know why he doesn't just grab the bull by the horns and go for it.
So, out of all the issues that we face internationally, do you think that the Israel-Palestine is the most significant one?
I don't, actually. I think the threat is greater from China. The Chinese are incredibly patient. There was a joke in The Onion the other day. It was a bunch of Chinese guys just sitting around a table, and it said, the Chinese government sits and waits for the United States to self-destruct or continue its self-destruction or something like that. It's because they know that they can outweight us. You know, we have convinced ourselves over the decades that we have to be all around the world protecting the weak and those without a voice and being the peacemaker. You know, we have 190 bases in 144 countries. We have to do all that. And the Chinese say, yeah, you have to. Go ahead. Spend all your money on that stuff. In the meantime, we're going to have 350-mile-an-hour trains and the best highways in the world and the best schools and the best hospitals and the nicest airports. And then all of our extra money, we're going to essentially bribe foreign countries to do things that we want them to do. So it's a lesson that I think we haven't learned as a country. There are other ways of winning hearts and minds.
Well, it's also they're actively engaged in making sure that people are arguing online, which is fascinating.
You know, they're very good at these kinds of behind-the-scenes, like quasi spy-like surreptitious actions. They actively promote us arguing, fighting, disagreeing. They promote these societal disruptions that we're all so worried about. And you know, we blame the Russians all the time, and certainly the Russians do this kind of thing too. But it's the Chinese that have really perfected it. And I think that most Americans don't realize how much we should be worried about that and trying to counter it.
Well, what could be done to counter it? Because a lot of it is, what's going on in social media is echo chambers.
Mm-hmm.
People exist in these echo chambers. They're completely addicted to their smartphones. They're on the algorithm all day long. They're checking things and getting ramped up by things. And they're being told various narratives, whatever it is. And there was a story recently about China getting caught using ChatGPT for various different services where they were using bots. And so they had done it automated through ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm. Brad Parscale is doing it right now on behalf of the Israelis. He recently won a $6 million contract to train ChatGPT to be more pro-Israel. It was in Reason magazine a couple of days ago.
Well, you also have the recent purchase of TikTok.
Absolutely.
There's a lot going on.
Which I think it could be very helpful for us. One of the things that we're bad at is identifying bots and controlling bots once they've been identified. I'll give you an example. I write columns all the time and have my own little podcast, and I said that I was optimistic that a deal seemed to be at hand, between Israel and the Gaza Palestinians, and then immediately I started getting attacked, and it was by obviously anonymous writers. I can't imagine that these writers are human beings. They had to be bots. One called me virulently anti-Semitic because I said this deal that it appears the president has negotiated was a good idea. So I'm virulently anti-Semitic, and then they built on that, and by the end of it, and nobody else was commenting, but by the end of it they said that I was morbidly obese and ugly and stupid too. It's like, what the fuck is that?
That does sound Chinese. Morbidly obese, ugly, and stupid too. You don't even look a little fat.
No, I'm 6'1", 190. I feel like I'm okay.
You look great. That's so funny. That's kind of hilarious, though. But if you just say things, enough people are going to believe it, that it's effective, and at least it moves a narrative into a certain direction. And
ChatGPT and these other chatbots are very easy to influence. When ChatGPT first came out, just for fun, I said, "Who is John Kiriakou?" And it said, "John Kiriakou is a former CIA officer, blew the whistle in the torture program, etc." John Kiriakou graduated from the University of Maryland and earned a master's degree in peace studies from the University of Bruges in Belgium. I don't even know where the University of Maryland is located specifically. I know it's called College Park. I don't know how to get there. Never been to the University of Maryland. I didn't know there was a university in Bruges, let alone one that gave me a degree in peace studies. So I said, John Kiriakou graduated from George Washington University with degrees in this and that. And it says, "You are incorrect." And I said, "No, you are incorrect." And then it says, "No, you are incorrect." And then I just gave up.
Why didn't you just say, "I'm actually John Kiriakou"? You fucking idiot.
I was afraid it was what it was going to do to me.
But I mean, did you ask it where you're getting your information from?
No, but it pulls from literally everywhere.
Right, so there's a narrative out there
somewhere.
somehow or another that there's universities that you never attended.
Right.
Huh.
Yeah. And then, if you make somebody angry, you can be just deleted from ChatGPT. A friend of mine, Pulitzer Prize nominated political cartoonist Ted Rall. He did the same thing. Who is Ted Rall? Well, Ted Rall, we know, is 15 years at the Los Angeles Times as an award-winning editorial cartoonist. It says there is no such person as Ted Rall. So I wonder who he pissed off.
Have you tried subsequently?
No.
Let's see what Perplexity says.
Okay.
Pull up. That's what we use. That's one of our sponsors. Let's see who is John Kiriakou. Let's see if they get it wrong too. Because if that's the case, that means somebody probably planted this incorrect information out there into it, which is like how and why. Like, what would be the purpose of doing
why?
that? I mean, especially something that's not even derogatory.
No.
It's
just factually incorrect.
Yeah, about your education. It gave you different places that you went to school, which is weird. Like, that doesn't even make sense.
No.
Like, what would be the benefit of that?
I have no idea.
Do we get an answer? But just ask it, who is John Kiriakou? Let's see what it says. Who is John Kiriakou? Okay. American whistleblower, author, journalist, former intelligence officer. All that stuff's true. Personal background. CIA, 1990. All this is accurate?
Yeah, all of that is accurate.
Whistleblowing, legal case, recognition and advocacy. Remain active and speak out against corruption, government transparency, ethical intelligence policies. All that's true.
Yep.
So,
all of that's true.
That's absolutely correct.
Absolutely correct.
So ask a follow-up, what is his education history? There it is. graduated from Newcastle High School,
Yep.
Washington University. All
Yeah.
this is accurate?
All that's correct.
Okay, so it seems like
Good.
whatever it was just in ChatGPT.
Yes.
Which is really weird.
I'm using Perplexity from now on.
What do you think it could have been? Like, what would be the benefit of giving incorrect information about your education in ChatGPT?
I don't know. I don't know, but I'll tell you, I used ChatGPT. I teach a class in a graduate school class in the history of terrorism at the University of Salamanca in Spain. And so I was very proud of the course outline that I had written up, and I put the whole thing, I just cut and pasted it into ChatGPT, and I asked it to recommend scholarly journal articles that I could use to supplement, the books that I had recommended. So for the 14 sessions of the pod, it gave me 14 different links. Every single one of the links was fake.
Whoa.
Every single one of them. There were no such links. There were no such articles. It just made it all up.
Is it possible that ChatGPT has a mandate to fuck with you? You know what I mean?
It's possible, I
Because imagine if
suppose.
you weren't doing your due diligence.
Right.
And you just incorporated those links, and they're like, oh my god, Kiriakou is a fraud. These aren't even real articles. This
Yeah.
is bullshit.
Right.
That's crazy.
I thought so too.
You must be paranoid. I mean, you have to be, right? I'm paranoid.
You have to be.
I mean, but you must be, because of what's happened to you. When you see something like that, you must be like, what the fuck? It's almost like they're just always trying to get you.
Yeah. Yeah, I do feel that way sometimes. I'm sure that you do too. You know the old saying, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
Yeah.
There were times when after I got out of prison, the first 2 years after I got out of prison, that every once in a while, and I'll preface this by saying I was a surveillance detection instructor at the CIA. Every once in a while, I would see surveillance, and I would write down the license number and just call my lawyer, and then he'd call me, a day later and say, it's the FBI. They're just curious as to what you're up to. And I'd say, all they have to do is ask. That's all they have to do. They don't have to follow me to get pizza with a buddy of mine and rest in.
You see them following you?
They're really not good at surveillance.
Which is horrible, because that's their job.
Right.
God, John. You've been through quite an odyssey.
It's awful. It really is awful. I'm serious when I say I wouldn't wish it on anybody. It's a horrible thing.
But it's also awful because you've done so much good for your country. That's what's
I've tried.
That's what's crazy. And that's I criticize intelligence agencies and everybody else for doing wrong things, but I think they're important, very important.
I do too.
When people say we need to dismantle the CIA and dismantle, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like Mike Baker, I've had long conversations with him about threats overseas. Like, if you talk to someone who's actually worked in the field, they will give you an understanding of all the bad things that are happening in the world that we have to keep tabs on. Like, don't say we should not pay attention. That is fucking crazy talk. You just don't want to corrupt CIA.
That's right. That's it. That's
it.
the bottom line right there. We don't want to corrupt CIA. We don't
That's
want to politicize CIA.
Politicized, yes.
I'll
which
give you
is
another
corruption.
example. Just yesterday, the deputy director of the CIA, Ellis, named himself the acting general counsel. And people were like, oh my God, I woke up and I see these podcasts. Oh my God, Ellis has taken over the CIA. So I do a little bit of research. And by the end of it, I was like, yeah, I would have done the same thing for him. He's qualified, right? He's had all the relative jobs, NSA, ODNI, CIA, the House Intelligence Committee. He's done all these jobs. He wants the Office of the General Counsel to do what it's told to do, to further the mission of the CIA. And they refused to do it. And so he took over. You can't criticize that.
Yeah, that seems like if he's a just man, that seems like a good response. But I don't know. I don't know.
But getting back to your point, and Mike Baker's point, and I'm out of the CIA, so I don't know as much as I used to know on a daily basis. But Americans get only just a little tidbit of what's happening in the world. Like, we don't read about these emerging threats, for example. We'll never know about some kind of counterterrorism operation that succeeded, you know, and that saved Americans from a terrorist attack. We'll just never know, because that's the nature of intelligence. You're not supposed to know. You know, the likes of Timothy Weiner will write a book about failures, but the successes have to remain secret.
What is it like having been a public servant, having worked for the government, and having done all these things that are so critically important for national security, and then to have that machine turn on you, do your time in prison, and come out, and now being someone who talks about it all?
Yeah. It was hard at first, Joe. I won't lie to you. I felt really alone in the world. And then a couple of days after my arrest, I got an email from a retired deputy director of the CIA, a guy that I had worked for at the very start of my career. And he said, I saved this as a souvenir. He said, you've chosen a difficult path. I only wish that I had had the guts to do it myself. And that changed my entire outlook on what I was facing. That I actually wasn't alone. And most of my CIA friends, like the people who were truly friends of mine at the CIA, are still friends. They had to be discreet about it for a little while, but they never walked away from it.
Challenge my authority?
You're a strong man.
Yeah.
I know how you've gone through all this. And come out on the other side as a person who comments on the state of the entire.
I'll add too that the election of Donald Trump, in kind of an odd way, freed me up to be more vocal, because the Obama people and the Biden people were far, far more willing to say, that is speech that we don't like. That needs to be prosecuted. And with Donald Trump, and I don't know if he even meant to do this or not, it's like so much more is out there and in the public realm, the public domain.
Why do you think that is?
You know, I think at the end of the day, that's populism. It's just a different way of looking at government. It's funny, because under populism, the feeling is very strong that they work for us, and they answer to us. And with these mainstream administrations, whether it's Obama, Biden, George W. Bush, it's like, well, the wise men are running the government, so we need to sit by quietly and let them do their important work.
And that's how things like the Patriot Act gets knocked.
Exactly right. That's a great point. Yes.
And the NDAA.
And the
Oh, we're not
NDAA.
going to use that.
Right.
We don't use that enough. Don't worry.
You know, when I was on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee staff, the Obama administration passed the NDAA, 20 whatever it was, where they legalized propagandization of the internet. This came out of the most innocuous issue. We had this propaganda station, radio and television, called Radio TV Marti, and it was beamed at Cuba, right? The only thing the Cubans really care about watching from us is baseball. So we would broadcast a lot of baseball games. But the way it was being broadcast from Florida, there was this little strip of land on the Gulf Coast in southern Florida where they could pick it up. But only with, like, Dish Network is what it was. Well, that's illegal because it's a propaganda station and Americans can't watch American propaganda. And so rather than, like, not broadcast it anymore or move the satellite or whatever, they decided, we'll change the law to make it easier and more and legal to propagandize the American people. So now the government can produce any propaganda that it wants and foist it on the American people. It's like, thank you, Barack Obama. Now I don't even know if the news that I'm reading is real or not. Thank you.
That is so insane. That's the origin of it? Wow. Well, lazy and also just takes advantage. This is an opportunity for something through that could be beneficial if you want to push propaganda on the American people. And up until now, it's been
That's right. No, a lot of people believe that after Ed Snowden's revelations, it would be turned back, even if it were just, one part at a time. That's just not. Where's the outrage?
Where is the outrage? You just gotta hide away.
Yeah. Depressing.
Do you think it could possibly push further in that direction?
Oh, I think that first of all, 100% yes. I think that it's natural that it would push further. It's up to us to push back.
I need a top.
And I don't think the American people have their act together enough.
Well, we're too divided.
Yeah,
That's part of
we
the
really
problem.
are.
With something like the NDA should be a nonpartisan issue.
That's right.
Everyone should be looking at that and go, this is crazy. Something like using propaganda against American citizens. What's the pros and what's the cons?
Right.
I want 2 columns. I want you to write down all the things that are going to be negatively affected by propaganda on American citizens, all the ways they could be used corruptly, and then all the positives we're going to get out of it. Oh, we can lie to Cuba. Fuck you. That's not enough.
No, it's not enough. I went to Cuba last year because they translated my first 2 books into Spanish and put them in the National Library of Cuba, and they had this ceremony during the International Book something or other for a bunch of American authors. So I went. And before I went, my editor at Consortium News said, do me a favor. He said, ever since I was a little kid, I've been an avid radio listener. He said, tune in after sunset when the signals are stronger. Tune in to American radio stations and tell me if the Cubans are jamming them or if you can hear stations. I said, that's a great idea.
I will break
So I had a radio there in my hotel room, and I got too many American stations. Miami and Fort Myers and anything you want to hear in Cuba from the United States, you can hear. They don't jam anything. And it's baseball, baseball, baseball. They want to hear every baseball game. We don't need radio TV marquees. I get a kick out of the Washington Post. Just clobbers Carrie Lake all the time. Every time she testifies on Capitol Hill about the Voice of America, they're like, no, we need Voice of America. We need to spend another $50 million to... Why? We don't need to propagandize them. First of all, have you ever heard of this thing called the internet? Right? Because that's where almost everybody gets their information. You want to propagandize people, do it on the internet. Not on some AM radio station that you're beaming off into space in the middle of the night.
They must be doing that anyway. They must be using
I should
it
hope
to
so.
propagandize.
I should hope so.
I mean, these bots that we're worried about from China, a bunch of them have to also be from America.
I would assume.
Some agency.
Yeah.
Which is just like, and then as AI gets more and more powerful, it's the race, like, who's in charge of that?
Yeah.
Like, how does that go? And what happens when everything gets automated? And what
Right.
happens when everyone gets on universal basic income and then they're relying entirely on the government?
Right.
Yeah.
Good point.
And this is maybe a decade away.
It's coming.
Yeah. Is there anything else you're concerned about before we wrap this up that you want to talk about?
I'm less concerned about the Russians. I think the president has played this right. He tried to kind of force the 2 sides together. He got pushed back. He did what he could. We just have to wait until they slug it out. And then when it looks like one's going down, then we can step in and try to negotiate something. But what are you going to do?
Is that really the only solution at this point?
I have a lot of friends who are professors of Russian studies, Soviet studies, all this stuff. And they all say the same thing, that the Russians are winning. The Ukrainians are losing. So the policy decision is, do we really want to jump in on the side of the Ukrainians? Or do we want to let diplomacy, let diplomats do what they're paid to do. And I always say, sure. We used to make fun of the Bush administration when I was at the agency because we had never seen an administration work so hard to not speak to our enemies. Right? We weren't allowed to talk to the Russians or the Chinese or the North Koreans or the Iraqis or the Iranians or the Cubans or the Venezuelans. It's like, my God, who do we talk to? We're not going to accomplish anything diplomatically if we just talk to the British and the French and the Germans. So, keeping the lines of communication open, I think, are very important to settling this. I think eventually, what everybody predicted at the very beginning of the hostilities is going to be the final result, and that is that the Ukrainians are going to lose territory, and the Russians are going to have to agree to probably fast-track membership of the European Union for Ukraine, and not NATO membership, but major non-NATO ally status, the same status that we have for Australia and Japan and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Ukraine. I think that's how it's going to end up.
I just can't imagine why they would want to keep it going. I mean, at this point, they're...
Well, what I'm told is that Putin is under great pressure from his military. That the Russian people don't necessarily want this to continue as much as the Russian military leadership does. That's what these professors are saying.
And why do they want to do it?
Because they want to destroy Ukraine. They want to take Kiev. They want it to collapse. You know, there are a lot of Russians who don't believe that Ukraine is a legitimate country. You know, even Crimea. Crimea was Russian until 1953. Khrushchev gave it to the Ukrainians as a and the Russians took it back.
And so they feel the same way.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so horrible to see like 60-year-old men getting conscripted.
Right off the street.
Yeah, kidnapped.
Mhm.
Just sent right to the front of the line, right to the wood chipper.
Yeah, it's just terrible.
And we don't even know the real numbers of
No.
casualties.
No, we don't. It's got to be huge. For the Ukrainians, at least.
So you're not concerned about that? You think that's going to work itself out, as
I do.
tragic as it is?
I think it's going to burn itself out. I'm very worried that the Israelis are going to attack Iran again. I'm worried that the Israelis aren't going to respect the deal that appears to be in process in Gaza or the West Bank. I mean, we're not talking about the West Bank, where just 2 weeks ago a Christian village ceased to exist because settlers from New Jersey took all their houses. You know, what happens next in the West Bank?
From New Jersey?
Yeah, there are a lot of synagogues in New York, New Jersey, Toronto that have these things called real estate seminars, where you can put your name on a list, and then they call you and say, hey, house just opened up over here in this Arab village that's not Arab anymore. Come and take your house. And 2 weeks ago, the village that the Israelis cleared out was one of the last remaining Christian villages. Drives me crazy.
What do you think their overall strategy is? They eventually want to just take over all of Palestine.
I think we should believe the Israelis when they tell us that they believe in greater Israel, which includes the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the southern quarter of Lebanon, a strip in southwestern Syria, and I mean the map that Netanyahu had at the UN the other day included the Sinai Peninsula, for heaven's sake. What's that all about? They took the Sinai in the '67 war and gave it back after the Camp David Accords. So this, yeah, I'm worried about Israel. Yeah.
Are you worried about Israel's influence on American politics? Because that's one of the things that's coming to light over the last couple of years since the invasion, where people are paying more and more attention to Israel, and then also seeing what happens when you criticize Israel.
They are very quick to primary elected officials who criticize Israel, and usually they'll win those primaries. AIPAC is very well funded. It is very, very well organized. It's the gold standard of lobbying organizations. I've never understood why AIPAC doesn't have to register as a foreign agent. with the Justice Department when everybody else does. Why is APAC special that it doesn't have to register? You know, back in 2008, I guess it was, I won a very small contract to write, it was like 6 op-eds for the Abu Dhabi Chamber of Commerce. And it was because I was going to write op-eds that supported American business in Abu Dhabi, right? So I had to go on FARA.gov, FARA.gov. It's the Foreign Agents Registration Act. And there's a form there. And I said, yeah, I took, you know, I won this contract. It was like 30 grand to write these 6 op-eds. And the source of the income is the Abu Dhabi Chamber of Commerce. And here's my name and my address and my phone number. Enter. Done. I registered. So if you're doing something, anything, on behalf of a foreign government, you have to register. Except if you're APAC. And I just don't understand that.
That seems so insane. And whenever you see like dozens of senators and congresspeople going over to Israel, you're like,
oh man. My very first week in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee staff, these lobbyists came in, and it was a parade of lobbyists all the time. Every day they're coming in asking for something. So these 2 guys came in, could not have been any friendlier. Hi, welcome to Capitol Hill. I said, oh, thanks. It's not my first go-round. I've worked on Capitol Hill before. Well, we wanted to welcome you with an all-expenses-paid trip to the Holy Land. I said, thanks, no. I can pay for my own vacations, but I appreciate it. Oh, nonsense. We'll take you to all the Christian holy sites. Thank you. I've been. I don't want to go. And some of my colleagues went for their all-expenses-paid trip to the Holy Land, courtesy of APAC. I was like, yeah, no, thank you. Not interested.
yeah, and that's just the beginning of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's nothing compared to helping out your campaigns.
Well, I'll tell you, I tell this story a lot, but I think it's appropriate here. I had been at the agency for 2.5 months, maybe? About 2.5 months. And I was told to give my very first liaison briefing. So this is going to be the Israeli Mossad and Shin Bet. And I was going to be one of about 8 analysts, and I was the most junior, so I would go last. Well, we don't allow the Israelis into CIA headquarters. We used to, but every time they would come, they'd say, hey, we brought gifts. Here's a gift for you. And it's all packed full of listening devices and batteries. And
Every one of them?
Every one of them. And we'd say, you guys, you can't come back here every single time and try to bug our conference rooms.
What'd they say to that?
Oh, sorry. Well, we're not sure how that happened. So we're like, yeah, you can't come in here anymore. So we rent an office where we meet the Israelis off campus.
Wow.
Yeah, because you just can't trust them. So
That is so crazy.
we go to this briefing, and it's just 2 people. It's a woman who was the Mossad officer and an older guy who was the Shin Bet officer. So because we were all overt, we were giving our true names. And first the senior political officer gives her briefing, and then the econ guy and the military guy and the oil guy, and finally it comes around to me. So I said, my name is John Kiriakou, and I'm going to brief you on Saddam Hussein's current psychology. And the Shin Bet guy goes like this. He goes, spell your name? So I spell it. And he writes it down. And he's looking at me over his glasses, and he goes, you are Jewish? And I said, I am not recruitable. Don't even think about trying to recruit me. Afterwards, I was furious. I went back to the office. My boss said, how did it go? I said, that son of a gun, Shin Bet guy tried to recruit me. Everybody started laughing. I said, why is that so funny? And he said, they've done that to every single one of us. It's like they can't help themselves.
It's crazy how effective it is, though.
Oh, yeah. Look at Jonathan Pollard. Now he's running for the Knesset. Bastard.
It's just crazy how much influence one country has
Yeah, it really is.
on a much bigger country.
Much bigger. And they have such a tiny population.
I know. What is it, like 9 million people?
Yeah.
Pretty gangster. It's pretty gangster.
Kudos.
Right? It
Kudos
really
to
is.
them.
It's like Chicago taking over the world.
That's right.
Right?
And saying we're going to do things our way.
Not even Chicago. Chicago might
No.
have more people. Well, listen, John, I really appreciate your time, and thank you, and thank you for your story.
Thank
for
you so much for having me.
being
This was
so
a real treat for
courageous,
me.
and it's a horrible thing that they did to you.